Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Paddington Art Prize 2010, and in particular to our floor talk. I'd like to introduce Joe Frost, who is lecturer at the National Art School, and he's going to take us through and talk about the paintings. So thank you.
Thanks,
Thank
Marla. Thanks for coming in. I'll just elaborate a little bit. I am a lecturer indeed, and I teach drawing and sometimes painting, although mostly drawing. But I'm a painter myself, and that's been my way into art, so the teaching aspect is very much a part of my weekly routine and my life, but I probably would count myself as an artist first and foremost, hopefully. And I do write a little bit about art as well. So that's how I've come to be doing these kinds of talks. But as an artist, I considered entering this prize, but I decided not to because I was already booked in to do the talk, and I thought it looked a bit, suspect. So I thought I'll leave that alone. But like the artists in this prize, I'm trying to work out what it's all about, what art is, what quality in art is, what my own convictions in art are. And writing and teaching, I suppose, give me other windows onto that. But I'm not going to pretend to be a completely detached observer here. I'm not going to be a critic either. I'm just going to talk about the works that I find give rise to meaning and to the kinds of meanings that I would hope to find in art. So I won't talk about everything. I may not even talk about the winner. Who knows? But I will talk about a range of works, but not the full range. Okay. I'll leave it for others. I know that there's a floor talk next week, and so perhaps that will cover works I don't, but that's not my problem. Okay, so let's get started. And just I want to make a few general points to start about landscape painting. We know that it's a landscape is well understood in Australia because it's our landscape that has distinguished us as European Australians, those of us who are European Australians, from the heritage, the history that we all come from, the European heritage. And of course we're increasingly aware of the Indigenous vision of the landscape, but for those of us who are not Indigenous, we would still, many of us, identify with the Australian landscape as our own. And so we are accustomed to the idea of landscape painting addressing real places and real sites, scenes that we come across in our everyday life, or in the red centre, which is probably not in the everyday life of most of us, but nevertheless, what I'm trying to say is we identify landscape as something that exists out there in the world around us. But to paint landscape is also to paint your own mind, and that's strongly apparent in any landscape exhibition, and especially here where the styles of painting, the approaches to painting are so varied. It's clear that every artist here is trying to follow, to look into themselves as much as look out at the landscape. In some cases, in fact, the landscape is hard to see in these works, and the painter's mind is very strongly apparent. But I'm going to, hang on, I'm getting ahead of myself now. I will get on to talking about particular works. But this thing of consciousness is very interesting. What is a particular artist aware of? And what do they choose to work with and to not work with in their work? I want to try to address that in talking about some of these works. I'm going to read to you a quote by an art critic from the early 20th century. His name is Adrian Stokes, and he was an English art critic from probably the 30s to the 60s. Not very well known today, probably not especially fashionable either. But he has some really interesting things to say about the artist's psychology and how that is manifest in the work that they make. How, by looking at the visible form of the work, we can almost enter the mind of the artist. And this is what he has to say. Our relationships to all objects in the world, seems to me to be describable in the terms of two extreme forms. The one, a very strong identification with the object, whereby a barrier between self and not self is undone. And the other, a commerce with a self-sufficient and independent object at arm's length. In all times except the earliest weeks of life, both of these relationships in vastly differing amalgams are in play together, as is shown, well, I'll leave it at that. So just to translate or think about that, he's basically saying that you can be immersed in the landscape and almost to the point at which you forget yourself and are simply carried along on a kind of rhythm or in a state of reverie, or one can stand back and be quite analytical. And he is saying that the child, in the first weeks of infancy, only has that aspect of standing back, of being immersed, and it's not until we reach adulthood that we have that capacity to stand back and analyse and I suppose be more objective about things. But he's also saying that those two qualities come together in art making, and I think that's especially true in landscape painting because there is a subject to which we give our attention. So I'm going to talk today about works where I feel that interplay between, on the one hand, being immersed and being spontaneous and letting the landscape carry you along is at play, but that there is also an attempt within the same work to stand back and structure and ensure that the work is not merely rubbish. Okay, which is a pretty eternal struggle, I would think, in painting. Okay, so I'm going to start by talking about Tom Carment's works here. Now, I'm in a privileged position to talk about these because I've just written an article about Tom Carment that will come out in Artist Profile within a number of weeks. So I know Tom, and I've had the chance to talk to him about his work. Tom only works from life. He does not work in the studio. He has a studio, but it's really more like a room where he prepares canvases and things. He goes out into the field, he sets up his easel, his watercolours, whatever he's working in, and he does do watercolours, oil paintings, pencil drawings. And I suppose he feels that he would like to tap into the mood of the day, and that's why he probably chooses not to work away from the subject. That to work away from it, to work in the studio, would be to actually lose that thread and bring in all kinds of false ideas and project those onto the work. So his work always has a feeling of being resolved on the spot. It's very fresh. And I find him a very interesting artist because he's not afraid to say, I'm utterly traditional. He's not afraid to, he's not trying to have an idea or even a style as such. It's more about giving over to that mood and trying to record that mood honestly. And I think he does that successfully. And yeah. I was talking at the start about spontaneity, and I mean, when you're working in the field, spontaneity is what it's all about. You set up your paints, you think that you're aiming for a certain thing, and then the light in the sky changes, or the clouds come over, and you have to be very nimble and very responsive to changes. It's interesting to wonder. I wonder how long these actually took. I don't know, but I can imagine that a little painting like this wouldn't have taken longer than 2 or 3 hours. Sometimes they might even fall together even quicker than that. So yeah, he's somebody who would rather work quickly and make many small, fresh works than to labour over something and lose that quality. The works, I think, are called Sydney in Springtime, and it really has that sense of wind, I think you'll agree, that tree. I'm going to move on now to a work over here, just in the doorway if you want to come along.